Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the first session of our digital product release launch and learn series. I'm going to be your host for this series. My name is Greg Hollis. Today we're going to be covering just an introduction to digital product release. Okay, before we get into the presentation, I'm sure you've all seen this slide many times. We have the safe harbor notice. So there may be some forward-looking statements in this presentation. They're based on our best understanding at this point in time. So just don't take anything as set in stone, as it could change.
Let's start with a little discussion about the evolution of release governance. In the last 5-10 years, there's been a trend in application development at the enterprise level. What used to be an IT project has now become more of a product being developed by business units. So development teams have moved closer to the business in that regard. And this was out of necessity, right? Applications have become the primary way that businesses compete with each other, and being able to respond quickly to the business required these businesses to take control and ownership of these products. However, IT is still responsible for governance. So this created sort of this hybrid operating model where our customers had to focus on governing products and governing the release of products that they didn't have a lot of control over. So this is what Gartner came out with some recommendations for this type of operating model. And the primary concept in this type of model is a trust but verify method, meaning you give these autonomous teams the autonomy they need to be agile and move fast, but let's put some guardrails on it. Let's make sure we are validating and verifying at every step of the way. And we're providing a validation, especially when it comes to the readiness of things going into production. Okay, so the challenges associated with this are many, right? In many cases, there was a lack of automation. You had a lot of products with interdependencies on each other. The increased use of things like microservices and architectures that were interrelated, meaning that releases had to be able to ensure that everything was ready before they went from one phase to the next. Being able to provide visibility into this was a challenge, and then giving teams the awareness that they are ready to go to production, right? That they do have all the necessary security scans and testing and validation, documentation, legal sign-off. All of that had to be accounted for. So what we did was we created a dedicated release app for managing these type of releases. The other thing customers were doing were, because all of this was happening separately from IT, the change process became overloaded. So a change would be created, and all of this validation effort was loaded into the change approval process. And this made the change process, very arduous and required a lot of interaction between the teams that slowed things down. And in the end, it wasn't very agile. They weren't able to compete with these applications the way they were hoping to. So what we've done with this release app is moved a lot of that to the release process so that you can validate at each phase of a release. And then when something completes the process, you can go into production rather smoothly with a much simpler change record, right? All the time providing a visibility into the each phase of the release, so everybody's aware of where everybody's at, and then providing some automation, making sure that if somebody says they did a security scan, they actually did it. No longer do we need to have an attestation that somebody did a security scan or they did the documentation. We could actually validate that by bringing data in from those systems and running policies against that data to ensure they're compliant. And then, of course, having a process that's reusable over and over again and is enforced by IT, right? Enforcing the process from the central IT governance organization really makes it much easier. It takes a lot of the planning work away from the product teams and gives it to the central IT to make sure that each phase of this release has the necessary components, okay? Right, so what are we aiming to do here? Is really provide a release process orchestrator that's looking at not just the manual task assignments and making sure tasks get done by all the different stakeholders, but also providing a way of ensuring compliance with automation, right? With policies. So validating release readiness with minimal overhead, without putting a burden on the development teams, without putting a burden on the governance team. That's what the solution is all about. And this is how we're going about this. We created a product that manages release life cycles. Okay, so what that means is you will define the phases of a release, and there could be different types of releases for, let's say, a major release that comes out once a quarter or once every 6 months, or you might have a minor release, or you might have an emergency break fix release or a patch, and those could be a much simpler process. And each of those releases, we call them release templates, are going to have tasks and policies associated with each phase of that release. Okay, and what we're doing is we're ensuring that everybody can see what phase they're up to in a release, what tasks are outstanding, and what policies are in compliant or not in compliant. And this is the visibility that we're providing to all the stakeholders. And we're also notifying folks when they have a task due, right? So this is all part of the underlying task management that the platform provides, and we're integrated with that. And it works just the same way as if you get an incident assigned to you or a change assigned to you, you get an email notification so you know you have to complete a task. And the visibility we provide ensures that everybody's on the same page and knows, what's keeping this version of this product from moving to the next phase or moving to a production deployment. The other side of this is some technology that we've had for many years now, and that's the DevOps data model. So we have a product called DevOps Change Velocity. We provide lots of data from DevOps tools, and these are tools associated with planning like Jira and Azure DevOps and Git repositories, right? So we understand when changes are being made to application code. And then you have pipeline tools like Jenkins and GitHub Actions and ADO pipelines and so on. So all of that data makes its way into the platform. So a lot of these tasks, you may start out when you first adopt this solution, these tasks could be manual, but over time, we can actually automate a lot of these tasks. And what you'll see is, today you may say, okay, here's a task, let's assign it to somebody to make sure that the security scan is done. However, we have the data, we know from the pipeline that the security scan was done and whether it was successful or not. So we can eventually replace that manual task with an automated policy. And this is the way you can mature through the adoption of this digital product release. So that brings me to the next slide is, what does an adoption journey look like? Well, first, we want to provide these capabilities to provide visibility and to streamline and track all the different manual tasks, right? Because we know in any release, there's a lot of tasks being assigned to a lot of different people, and you want to be able to essentially see where every step is at. So this is taking place within ServiceNow, and all the users can have visibility into this. And maybe if it's not necessary, they don't have to log into ServiceNow, but they would still get access to the task updates and things like Microsoft Teams or in email, for example, and see the status changes of those tasks. At the next level of maturity, and what I'll do is when I go through the demonstration, I'll go through these these phases of the maturity model one by one. In the next phase of the maturity model, we integrate with release planning. So we know most of the work items that get assigned to developers are in tools like ADO boards and Jira, for example, and even GitHub issues. So we know that when developers are working on something for a particular release, that's the task associated with it is coming from these tools. So we integrate with these tools so we can track those work items, the user stories, the epics, the defects, and so on, and make sure that each release, the scoping of each release will contain the the defects and the enhancement requests that are going to be part of that release. And this is a very easy way to know. And as a stakeholder, you might want to know, hey, when is my bug going to be fixed? What release is that coming out in? When is that going to be deployed to production? This is information that you'll be able to provide those stakeholders. Now, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of these tasks can actually be automated, right? That means is you don't have to have somebody, receive a task assignment and sign off that they did it. We can actually go and see if the task is complete without assigning it to somebody. And in many cases, those tasks get done in an automated way through pipelines. So what we're really doing is providing a mechanism to ensure compliance and ensure at each step at each phase of a release that all of those policies are in compliant before we move to the next phase. Okay. And then of course, being able to define those policies yourself, we provide, about a couple of dozen or so out of the box, right? That's integrated with our DevOps data model, but you can create your own, and you can create your own automation around these tasks and these policies. So that becomes, once you've reached that point, you're at the highest level of maturity, and you can continuously improve your release process. Okay. So from that, I'm going to move over to a live environment. And first, I'm going to show you, we talked about the two aspects of the hybrid model, right? So you have governance on one side, and then you have the product owners on the other. I'm going to start out with the governance side. So Andrew Jackson is a release administrator that's responsible for actually creating releases. Creating the process around releases, defining the release process, defining the policies, ensuring that product teams are following those policies and so on. So as a release administrator, they create and manage the release templates, okay? So what does a release template look like? I'm gonna jump into one here. This is a major release template. And what you'll see is, in this template, we're gonna have phases, tasks, and policies. So let me show you a more visual view of that. And so you can define the phases however you wish. You can give the phases whatever names you want. And in this case, this is what we call a time-bound release. So that means each phase has a designated duration, okay? And that means when we reach the end of that phase, and if you start the release on a certain date, 5 days later, that phase is going to end. And we're tracking all the tasks and the due dates associated with that phase, okay? So we want to make sure that those tasks get complete within that duration. And then you'll have phases like the planning phase, the development phase, you might have a packaging phase. Again, you define the phases, and then for each of these phases, you're going to define tasks that are associated with these phases, okay? So in the planning phase, we want to, scope out the app, identify the stakeholders, prepare the documentation, identify potential risks. These are all happening before we even do any development work. In the second phase, we do development work, and we start looking at making sure that the testing is complete, the packaging is complete. And what you'll see is some of these tasks are actually what we call an approval task. They need somebody to approve them. Some of them just get assigned to somebody, and they'll receive an email, they'll check that they completed it. And so as you move through the different phases, you'll see the different tasks associated. Now, approvals require somebody to approve it. Now, because this is a template, we don't want to hard code who that approver is, because we want different product teams to be able to use this template. And so we have a mechanism for actually looking up who that approval person might be. We call it an approval definition. So here you see I have different types of approval. I have CAB approval, I have a product owner approval, and then I have a product owner's manager's approval. We could drill into that, and I could show you what that looks like. What we're doing is we're going to take the product owner, the digital product record that's associated with the release, right? Because every release is related to a digital product. And we're going to say, okay, this is a approval action of a user. Show me all the user fields that are associated with this digital product record. Let's find one. Okay, and now let's find the manager, right? So we're dot walking from that record to the user record that's associated with the manager. That's the reference field. we might actually want the manager's manager to approve it. So we could do that again. We could dot work from the manager to the manager's manager. And now this becomes like a higher level of approval for this particular task. And that's what gets assigned when that template is executing. That's who will get assigned that task. And what this does, it helps us create these reusable templates where we can do lookups as part of the execution of that template of who actually needs to approve something, who a task should be assigned to, and so on. Okay, so that's the role of, let's say, the release admin. Okay, now I'm going to switch over to one of the product owners. Okay, and what you'll see is the product owner is, in this case, the product owner has actually 7 active releases going on right now, expected to complete soon. So we list those out for the product owner so they can see what the status is, what the progress is for all of those releases. We could drill into some of these releases and see the details, but at a high level, we can see all the approval tasks that are outstanding, all of the manual tasks that are outstanding. But also, as a product owner, we're responsible for actually planning the release, right? So here's a release planning page where we can see these work items come into the backlog, okay? And these are coming in automatically. I'll get back to this in a minute, but we're going to actually drill into one of these releases, okay? And actually, let's drill into the summer patch. This one just initiated today, just kicked off a new release. And we can see basically everything we need to know about this release. There's a release start date of yesterday. We expect this release to end in 48 days, right? So this is based on a release template of 49 days. And each of these phases has a certain amount of days associated with them. I can drill in that. I can see all of the policies and approvals that would be associated with this release. Let's go ahead and look at the release execution. Here we have tasks and policies associated with each phase of the release. So as a product owner, very quickly, I can see where we are in the phase of the release. We're somewhere in the very beginning, and what tasks have been completed or not. This one, it just started, so I have one task that's a work in progress. If I drill into that task, I see it's assigned to John Chipley. John Chipley would have to log in, or they would get an email that the task was assigned to them. So this is part of maturity level 1. We're just managing the phases of a release. We're managing the tasks associated release. We're not really dealing with policies at this point, but it's just a very quick and easy way to get started with digital product release. So let me go into impersonate John. Okay, so John now logs into ServiceNow. They get to their home screen. They see they have the task assigned to them. They can go ahead and mark that task as complete and close it out when they completed it. And then that would be reflected back in Eileen's dashboard, right? So, and this is the way you track the manual tasks across the various releases, okay? So, so that's really maturity level 1, as we just talked about, just tracking and tracking and visibly making sure that things are getting done. Now let's talk about release planning. I showed you this a minute ago. This is the release planning dashboard, and what you see here is you're going to see lots of releases, lots of work items in the backlog. Where are these coming from? In this case, they're coming from Jira. So if I click on any one of these, it's going to give me some details about the work item. This one's linked to an epic. From here, I could actually click into Jira and see more detail, right? Because we're just bringing the header information over. But if you want to see all the work notes and so on, that's all going to be tied. All of that detail is going to be in Jira. Often as a product owner, I'm not interested in that level of detail. But what's important is that I can see within my release planning which work items are going to be part of which release. So I could see in the summer patch, we're just doing some bug fixes and some security updates and so on. That's part of the summer patch that I'm working on here. I think, and in many cases, so as a product owner, I could actually designate which work items and which product features end up in which version, so I could just drag and drop them. However, usually, more often than not, this will be done in the planning tool. This will be done in ADO boards. This would be done in our own SPM Agile solution, right? This would be done in Jira. However, we have the ability to do it here if that's not the case, okay? So that's really, once you start bringing in this type of information from those tools, now you've reached maturity level 2, and now you could not only track releases, but track the completeness of these work items as part of that release. I think, Greg, I'll pause here to see if there are any questions that we can answer before we move on to the next part of the demo.
Let's see. Most are getting answered throughout the chat.
Okay, great.
Yeah, there's nothing directly, so we can keep going, I think.
Great. Okay, so that completes maturity level 2, integrating with the planning tools, bringing the product features and the bugs and the defects into digital product release so we can track it. All right, now let's talk a little bit about policy, okay? So policies, as I said before, are queries, right? They're queries to make sure that things get done. And what we're doing is we can log in to these tools directly and see the data. So for example, I can go into ADO and see, okay, did all the integration tests pass? I can go into Jenkins and see, did the security scan run? Or I can use the DevOps data model, make that data available to these policies, and then we can run these in an automated way, okay? So what we do is we assign these policies to a release, and I'll show you what that looks like here. Let me bring up this one here. In this release, we have lots of policies, and we can see as the release executes at various stages of the release, we're going to make sure that these policies execute and are in compliant, you see? So what happens is as builds are being created in build pipelines, those results propagate into ServiceNow. And then when these policies run, and these run on a fixed interval, say once a day or once every hour even, to make sure that they're in compliant, we can see all the stories have associated commits. You know, that's a policy. We want to make sure that when folks are committing work to Git, that those work items get assigned to stories, and I mean, those commits get assigned to stories or defects and so on. So we're making sure that developers are following best practices. We're making sure that security scans are running, smoke tests are running, and all of this data is coming to us in real time. I'll show you an example. I'm going to rerun the policies because I just ran a pipeline here. And in my example today, I'm using integration with GitHub Actions. I have two types of pipelines, one that builds the artifacts and another one that deploys the artifacts. You can see in the previous run, we created artifact and everything looked good. And how do I know it looked good? Well, we actually propagate that data to the release dashboard. So if you look at this quality tab here, we can see the actual results of the scanning from the artifacts. And we can see that all the unit tests passed, for example. And if I had functional tests and performance tests and so on, all of that data would be propagated here. Some of this data is coming from tools like SonarQube, some tools like Veracode, and all of that is part of the DevOps data model. So we have access to it to propagate it here. I'm going to run another job here. And in this case, in GitHub, when that job runs, we'll see that, you know, maybe things didn't go so well, okay? So the scan didn't complete successfully, all right? So we're gonna let that run, takes a couple of minutes. In the meantime, I'm gonna show you some other capabilities of the dashboard here. And it's also, okay, so we see all the, from the release overview, we can see how many tasks have been completed. 29 have been completed. 5 of them are still open. I could drill into those 5 and see a list of them. And then I can make sure that they're assigned to the correct people and so on. We can see again the execution of the policies. I'll come to change requests in a minute. That's another capability. What we've done is integrated with deployment pipelines. And if you're familiar with DevOps change, we can create those changes in an automated way, or I could actually manually create those changes associated with the release, right? So anytime we deploy something, I say, okay, let's manually create a manual change. I'll do that from here. We can do just a normal change, and that's going to now be associated with the release. And then in a minute, I'll show you how we can actually deploy an automated change. Save that. And now that change will become part of this release. So you might have, multiple changes associated with a release for, for several reasons, right? You might have different production environments. And each time you deploy to a production environment, let's say you have one in Tokyo, one in New York, each one is going to require a change record because each one is a different configuration item, right, in ServiceNow. So, one day you might deploy to Tokyo, the next day you deploy to Colorado, and then you have two different change records. So you'll have different change records associated with release. But often with, in the case of, let's say, continuous deployment, what you'll have is as features are ready and as builds are complete, if they went through all their testing process, even before all the product features are complete, you might deploy 2 or 3 features, and you'll get a change record for each one of those deployments. So that's why you can see a lot of change records for a release would accumulate, okay? It's just a more modern way of working, a more efficient way of working to track changes and deployments in an ongoing manner. Okay, so let's go back to our build. This one just completed here. We track all the builds in ServiceNow as well. So I can see in the release artifact, I can see that build number here. Let's refresh this. Should be coming in as 169, I believe, was the last one. And that would show up in the this. All right, we'll give it another minute. It might be showing up in pending. There it is. So it's the artifact registration is pending. So what that means is anything associated with that artifact, the build results, the unit testing, the functional testing will all be part of the data that's available to us for compliance and for policies, for executing policies, okay? So as those execute and as the policies run, we're able to validate those policies when they run, okay? So now we've created a build, and let's say we want to do a deployment. Those deployments are going to run, okay, as a separate pipeline. And now, this is basically, let me see, what was that artifact here? I believe we're up to version 1.1. Still pending. Okay. I'll go ahead, and what I'll do is I'll deploy this one, and we'll go ahead and deploy the previous one. So this will kick off a deployment pipeline. And keep in mind that this deployment might take place a week after we build it, right? Because there might be various stages in that. But we're tracking everything associated with that artifact. So now that we go to deploy it, it's going to automatically create a change record. So I can manually create the change record, or we can use the integration with the DevOps data model to automatically create those change records, okay? Any other questions? Anybody from the ServiceNow team like to add anything at this point? We've got quite a group on from our product management team.
Hey, Joe.
Also,
I don't at the moment. We're answering a bunch of Q&A questions. So definitely, if there are more questions coming up, place them in the Q&A. We're typing answers as quickly as we can.
Great. If there's anything interesting on that uh, Q&A board that you want to bring up and share with everybody, now might be a good time to do this. I'm just waiting for my change record to be created.
Yeah, so there was a question that was just asked about the relationship between change requests and the release itself. And by the way, everybody, since I started talking, my name is Colin O'Brien. I'm one of the inbound PMs. And Balaji is also one of the other inbound PMs, and he and I have been answering a bunch of questions along with Kaylin on the outbound side. But on the change request itself, there was a question about how the relationship works. And we are the way when Joe opened the change request manually, and also when change requests are opened through DevOps change velocity automatically, we have added a reference not to the release itself, but to the version of the product that is being deployed. And the thinking behind this is that the change request itself, like when you open a change and you reference the configuration item, like an application service, that application service is what's changing. But what's changing about it is a new version is being deployed. So by having the connection to basically the version of the product, it means that the change can not only describe what is it, like where are we deploying it, but what is it we are deploying, so that if an incident comes from a change, or if there's some outage caused by the change, we have a connection that says, here is what we deployed. And as you get into the further ends of the maturity curve that Joe is going over in the PowerPoint, we also have, through these integrations, the ability to then say, here are the artifacts that were built from that version. Here's the code that was a part of that deployment. Here are the test results from the pipeline that ran. Here were the stories, no matter where they were in SPM or otherwise. So it gives a lot of long-term, gives a lot of traceability to help with root cause analysis, or to help with restoring service faster, because you have all the details that come off of that version of the product. So that's how the connection works with change management.
Yeah, and these changes are so comprehensive. Basically they're created automatically, but they answer all those questions, right? Of who, what, why, when, and how. We can see actual code details, for example, little snippets of code showing in the change record of what actually changed. Now, not everybody likes that level of detail. You might not want application code inside your change record for a lot of reasons, right? You can turn that off. Okay, so just keep that in mind. But the idea is that these changes get created automatically. They get tied back to the release, and they tell you who made the change from the commit record. Why is the change being made? Well, we're doing it to fix a bug, or we're doing it for an enhancement request. That comes from the user story or the defect work item in SPM or Jira. When is it going to be deployed? That's part of the change record as well, and that ties back to the release the release planning. So all of this is tied together, and and this basically brings us to the advanced automation, this level 4 of our maturity model, where we're creating these changes automatically, and we're driving that integrated risk assessment. So, as part of that change approval policies, for example, we can make sure that those changes aren't deployed if the stages of the release weren't complete, if there's some compliance issues, if there's some policies that weren't complete, right? All of that data would be available for those change approval policies. So that's all I have from a demonstration capability. Are there any questions or concerns or comments that we should spend a little more time on?
So one thing, since we have a little bit of time, that I was thinking there's also a question in the Q&A that this can help answer. Since so many of the respondents to the first poll were about leveraging release management 2.0. So there's a question about, is this replacing release management 2.0, especially because we're focused on the software side and not hardware releases, at least not yet. So this is effectively the replacement for release management 2.0. If you are using release management 2.0, you have probably customized it quite a bit. At least that's been my experience. So if you are using it for other types of releases, it will still be there. Although we are ending official support for it starting in Xanadu. That's the time of when it will start. Now, we've also had, I think, 6 cases opened over the past year. And we will be supporting it for quite some time, like so long as your contracts are, still have release in them. So I don't foresee that if you're using it for other types of releases, that it will be much of a change for you. That being said, we are investigating how to use the concepts that we have built into DPR for other types of change. So I've been interviewing customers for different things outside of software, and there's a lot of overlap in concepts. However, the hardest thing that we have done as we've been building digital product release has been about the experience, making sure that you have the right information for that kind of release. And so as we're investigating, supporting other kinds of releases like hardware, also I've been asked about managing service releases as well. As we're learning about that, a lot of the concepts seem to hold, but the experience would need to shift, and we're learning what that would look like. So if things like hardware-based release management is of interest to you and is of importance, then please reach out so that and I have the people that indicated in the Q&A, so I'll be able to track you down and ask questions. But definitely you can reach out so that we can that'll help influence our roadmap on what would that type of release look like.
So digital product release is available as part of the ITSM Pro license, right? So if you have ITSM Pro, you're entitled to use it. However, even if you don't have ITSM Pro, you can still install it in a sub-prod environment. And if you find it, it provides a lot of value, you can upgrade your license to move it into production. But anybody can install it in sub-prod, and you can start experimenting with the capabilities, and you can engage with us further through the community.